modern web, we have something very similar to what we just have seen now. We have a client and a server that are sending messages between each other. So we have client-server architecture. The protocol which is used to send and receive communication or messages between the web client and web server is what? What is the protocol? So for emails is SMTP, and for World Wide Web is what? So if the web browser wants to connect to the web server and request a web page, which protocol is it going to use? It's HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So that protocol defines the commands that the browser can send to the web server and the responses or codes that the web server can respond to the client. So we have a web browser, that's the client, and it requests a page from the server. So what happens is that the web browser sends a request to the web server. The web server is very similar to the email server. It's sitting there and it's bound itself to port 80 in this case, and is listening for incoming connections. So the web server is always there, listening on that port for any requests from clients that want to get web pages. So when the request comes in, the server will look at the request if everything is fine. Then it will serve the request. And the way it serves it is goes and look up in its hard drive if it actually has the web page that is being requested. And if it has it, it will send it back to the client. And it will say, everything is okay, and I sent you the page. When the client receives, so the client will send connection request, and it will send a request. First connection has to be established. It will send a request for a web page. The server will serve the page. It will send a page, which is usually in HTML language, hypertext markup language. So the browser is a pretty silly application which the only thing it does is request pages from the web server, and when it gets the pages, it reads the HTML code or whatever code page is written in, interprets it, and displays it on the screen, properly formatted. And so this is a markup language which defines how the text should appear on the screen. So for example, here we have bold color, here we have a title, here we have a link, and then there is an image which is a particular size, and it should go in the upper right corner. So that's what this HTML defines. So the only thing the browser does, request the HTML page, receive it, interpret the HTML code, and display the page on the screen properly formatted. If the browser wants to do something more complicated than that, then it needs help, because it can't do it by itself. So it needs either a plugin, which is additional logic that is loaded inside the browser process. Remember, the process is an instance of a running program. So browser's running, it wants to do something other than display HTML. So let's say it wants to play music or video or open a PDF file or an Excel file or something like that. It can't do it. It doesn't know how to do that. So either it needs a plugin, it's loading beside the browser process, or it needs a helper application that is a whole, it's gonna fork off a whole another process to do that. So it's gonna open, let's say, Microsoft Excel or Adobe Reader or something, which is a separate program running separate from it to do that. So this is the steps that would occur when the web client wants to request a page from the web server. So the first thing is browser determine the URL. So URL is the Uniform Resource Locator, or that is the hyperlink. We will see how this hyperlink looks like in just 1 second. Next, the hyperlink contains a DNS name. So let's say it says google.com. Right? We cannot connect to google.com. We need the IP address of Google to connect to that server. So first thing we need to do is contact the DNS to obtain the IP address of the Google server. If the DNS is alive and sends us the correct address, we can connect, establish TCP connection. Next, the client or web browser will use the hypertext transfer protocol, so it's going to say, hello, I'm requesting page index.html from you. And the server will look up in its hard drive. Alright, it will accept the connection and the request. Will look up in its hard drive. If it has an index.html in the requested folder, it will send that back to the client. When the client receives it, it will display the page on the screen and finally release the TCP connection. Let's look at these URLs. Oh, before we look at the URLs, I want to say that the client, what we just shown, that is for static pages. So that's HTML pages or other pages that don't run on the server itself. So both the web server and the web client are silly applications. The web client is silly because the only thing it does is request pages from the server, and when it gets them, it interprets HTML and displays them on the screen. If it needs to do something more than that, it needs help. The web server is in the same situation. What it does is it accepts incoming requests from the client. It looks in its hard drive. If it has these pages, it sends it to them. If it has to do something more than that, it needs help. So it needs Internet server extensions. So if it's going to run any dynamic pages that needs to do processing on the server in order to respond to that client, then it needs extensions. And that's additional logic that has to be added to the web server to do server-side processing of pages. So we can have server-side pages that will run on the server in order before respond to the client to generate some custom response to the client. Let's say we want to shop online and we want to buy something from Amazon.com. Okay, so for us to do that, Amazon has to look in its database and see if they have this product, first of all, and second, identify who we are as the customer, and finally, process the request and generate a unique page that will be returned to us and say, you just ordered widget number 1 and it costs such and such amount of dollars that we'll send to you in a couple of days. That's a custom response that's different for every client of whatever they ordered. So that's a dynamic page, which it has to be generated on the server. So we do have some server extensions such as Java server pages, active server pages, PHP, and other things that can be loaded as extensions on the web server to process this type of code. So these are server-side dynamic pages. And on the client, we can also do some processing if we want to. In that case, we would use scripting languages, such as JavaScript, VBScript, and things like that, which allow us to create these plugins that we mentioned earlier can be loaded inside the browser if you want the browser to do something more complicated than just display HTML. So for example, JavaScript can be used to, let's say the client will place an order. So we will check on the client before it places the order, on the client side, if they filled in the information correctly in the form. Let's say they didn't type their name, they typed a bunch of punctuation and asterisks and stuff in the last name field. So we'll be like, did you type your name correctly? Or phone number is 000, put your correct phone number, or something like that. So we will check this form on the client side. So that stuff is running on the client, the scripts. And these are running on the server side. The active server pages, Java server pages, and the PHP and other technologies that we can have. So let's look at the URLs. Let's see how we implement these URLs. So the links for the web, the World Wide Web. So if we think about the World Wide Web, it is a web of linked documents. And this idea came in 1945 by a scientist called Vannevar Bush. And what he said is that the way we normally do things with computers is when we write computer programs, they run one line of code at a time. So first line will run, then the second line will run, and the third line will run. And they run in sequence like that. But he was saying, so if we were to read documents, newspapers, or something else, then we would be reading one line by line. But then he thought, but this is not the way our human mind works. So when we think about something, we're thinking about it, and all of a sudden we have a thought that is linked to it that sends us to another subject. And when we think about the second subject, we have other thoughts that link us to the third subject. So basically he thought it might be more interesting or better to organize our documents in such a way that we link them together. And so he came up with the idea of not sequential links order, but linking the documents to these subjects in a sense, so that we can jump from one subject to another. And that's how the idea of the hyperlinks was born. So let's look at how we can make these